The percentage share of gross value added of agriculture and allied sectors to total Indian economy has increased from 17.6% in 2018-19 to 20.2% in 2020-21. The budgetary allocation for agriculture sector has increased over the years, and yet, with over half the working Indian population engaged in this sector, a lot still can be done is the dominant narrative. Where do we stand now in agriculture? Where can we move from here with supporting upcoming budget? To discuss all that and much more, we are joined by Ashok Kumar Jha, former Finance Secretary to the Government of India, Ms. Parvati Menon, farmer and founder Fresh Harvest from Tamil Nadu, and Mr. Atish Mathur, public policy expert from New Delhi. I'm going to begin with you, Mr. Jha. Since you have seen the budget making exercise from the inside and have participated in several budgets in one way or another. Every budget that I have tracked begins with agriculture. I mean, after the introductory GDP growth, etc., we jump straight to agriculture, and then the first 5 to 15 paragraphs of every budget are focused on agriculture. We will do this, we will do that. Basically, how taxes that will be collected later in the budget will be disbursed to the agricultural sector. Do you think it's time to change this? Because if after all these years, the sector still continues to be not inefficient, the sector continues to be poor, the farmers are, the dominant narrative remains of poor farmers, surely we can change the way we are approaching this sector in budget, Mr. Jha?
Yeah, actually what you said is absolutely correct. See, the reason why in every budget speech after the preliminary paragraphs, agriculture finds the top billing is because the largest number of voters are there. And no political party would want to ignore that constituency. But coming to what we should really be doing, I think, you see, if you look at most of the budgets, at least last few years, while there is a lot of talk about agriculture and what one should do, to alleviate the situation there, we have talked about doubling farmers' incomes and so on. But when it comes to actual investment in agriculture, it's very, very low. What we have wound up doing in the last few years is we give out doles. We say, okay, each farmer will get so many thousand rupees per year. Or we say, okay, we will now waive off the loan interest or give loans at a lower rate of interest and so on. Now, this only perpetuates the current situation. If one has to look at why is Indian agriculture in a crisis the last few years, is because, these are well-known facts, it's because the holdings are very small, they're fragmented, there are too many people dependent on agriculture. In most other countries, when the country started developing, there was a shift of people from the agricultural sector to industries and then on to services. Since our manufacturing base has not increased, so the people are still stuck in agriculture. In fact, what was most alarming, the other day I saw that during this pandemic, the number of people in the agricultural sector actually increased because there were no jobs in the non-agricultural sector. So essentially, we have to ensure that productivity goes up in agriculture. If you compare the productivity levels of most crops in India with that of, say, even China or other countries, we are way, way behind. And the only way that we can catch up is to go in for massive investment in agriculture, not handing out doles to people, which will just perpetuate them in their present condition. So the low incomes of agriculture, that has to be, can only be remedied if we have people who, if we have lesser people there and much more investment in agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. We'll take this point up further in the debate. Ms. Parvati Menon, as a hands-on farmer, you are one of the people who have actually left what is known as the services sector and joined farming, quite contrary to what Mr. Jha was saying, that people need to move from agriculture to manufacturing and services. Now, it is certain that you have done so thinking, assuming that there are greater economic returns. As Mr. Jha just mentioned, this has become a and I observed earlier that this is now a political discussion rather than an economic. Do you think it's time to change the narrative around agriculture from Annadata, from doles, to an economic agencies where you join the markets, you bring supply chains, you grow a certain kind of crop, rather than what we have been doing over the past several decades?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I would like to build on, upon what Mr. Jha has just stated. Very clearly, we are in a decade when we cannot afford to continue with the Annadata paradigm anymore, because it binds and allows for a lot of exploitation in the political, sphere of the democracy. Whereas if you look at agriculture, as an enterprise, like any other professional services enterprise, it has a set of resources, it has an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur needs to use the resources available at hand in order to create a productive output. And unfortunately, because we stay within the paradigm of Annadata, it is so connected to aid and dole and, loan closeouts, etc., that we're just not allowing for the Anna Uddemi, the Anna entrepreneur, to really rise. And there are many. If you look at the horticulture space in India, over the last decade, it has, grown exponentially. In fact, today our horticulture exports, are more than our staple export, for instance. And our production has risen a lot as well. And 16-17% of our total output is now horticulture, and horticulture is cash crops. It's based on demand, and the fact that farmers, small, medium, large farmers, are moving to horticulture indicates that there is an underlying entrepreneurial instinct and enterprise appreciation that exists in the agriculture space, but we've just not allowed for it to get the air and the sunlight that it really deserves and needs. But I think there are some great examples now. I know as a farmer myself, I'm linked to the market. I produce for the market. It delights me to get feedback from my customers. I make updates to what I'm producing and how I'm producing for the market. And not only am I doing raw production, I'm doing production of the raw material, plus also doing a certain amount of processing, which is when the productivity of the enterprise begins to improve. And I think there's great examples sitting in horticulture. Now we really need to expand that. We need to give it a lot more sunlight and begin to shift our minds to an Anna Uddemi paradigm, which is going to be very necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Menon. I come to Atish Mathur. Mr. Mathur, you have heard the practitioner of policy, you have heard the practitioner of farming. As an analyst, where do you think is the gap? For instance, the three, what both our panelists said, Mr. Jha as well as Ms. Menon, that we need a greater efficiencies in the sector. We need to move away from the Annadata point. We need to get away from politics and look at agriculture as an economic sector rather than one that thrives on dole, including the rich farmers. So in that context, when you look at the 3 farm laws that were introduced and now have been repealed, how do you even begin to change this entire edifice of agriculture where the sector is just feeding off taxpayers' money?
Right. So foundationally, there's a primary conflict with the way we design agricultural policy, and the question is, who is the agricultural policy for? Is it for the farmer, who's the producer, or is it for the consumer, wherein prices are a matter of reasons why governments are thrown in and thrown out of power? And maintaining that right balance has been a fundamental concern across governments historically in the country and almost any other developing country across the world. undoubtedly, farmers should not be treated as creatures, as people that need to be pitied upon. They're enterprising individuals. They need to be treated like those. They need to be given the infrastructure. The ease of doing business must extend to the agricultural sector so that they can become what they can. And as Jha sir was telling us, there are too many people in agriculture, with agriculture not contributing commensurately to the GDP, which means you'll have to let some people off agriculture, and two, agriculture in itself, and when we look at incomes from agriculture, crop in itself is not just an income. There is, of course, land. Now, that land may also be used for crop, but that also could be rented out to, say, wind companies, and that could generate alternate incomes for the farmers. So we must understand there are four basic, in my opinion, policy objectives that we should look at. We should shift from just production-based farming to improving the livelihoods of farmers, giving them that sense of holistic growth that we should. Two, environment and agriculture are closely interrelated and resources are finite. So how best can you efficiently utilize those resources to ensure that the agricultural sector grows, and also at the same time, you're able to create a sense of a sustainable working ecosystem? Because the first sector that takes the most massive amount of hit is agriculture, because of climate volatility, because of weather volatility, and of course, you have price-related risks as well. Third, how do you make a risk-resistant sector? You've got insurance policies and mitigation programs for almost every other sector. You've got, the insolvency bankruptcy code in case companies go bankrupt. But how do you protect the farmer for fluctuations in the market while ensuring the farmer is going to grow beyond a certain point? And to the point that you said, the farming laws, agricultural markets are a necessity. They must exist. But at the same time, you should also make sure that the farmer gets to sell whatever the farmer wants to whoever the farmer wants to. And that is why when you have built-in provisions of contract farming, I mean, think about it. It does definitely help the farmer. If you can have, something called a Competition Act, you can also have some form of a law restricting monopolistic trade restrictive practices even to the agricultural sector. It's not that it will be a completely open sector with, corporate, just walking into the sector and exploiting every farmer that there could be. No doubt. So that's why we need to sort of evolve the sector per se.
I come to you, Mr. Jha. Mr. Mathur has raised some very interesting points, and but before that, around how to fix agriculture. But before that, what's your view on why the 3 farm laws were resisted so strongly by a section of the farmers? I believe they are rich farmers and middlemen. However, we would like to know your views.
See, from what I have seen in the villages in the states where I have some personal knowledge of, which are basically Andhra Pradesh and Bihar, most of the farmers sell their produce locally. Okay, there is no question of they're going to any market, regulated market or whatsoever. They are in debt to the local money lenders. As soon as the crop is harvested, they either sell a portion of their give a portion of their produce to the money lender or sell it to the money lender for cash. So they do not have any exposure to, the regulated market sector.
So, Mr. Jha, allow me to interrupt you here. Sorry. So this sounds like what is a typical case in economics or in regulatory policies known as market failure. And these are the areas where it is incumbent upon the government to enter and fix the anomalies or fix the market failure through whatever means. If the market failure is only going to be fixed for the benefit of a certain kind of people to sustain a certain kind of ecosystem in which the small and marginal farmers are the exploited and the rich and the traders are beneficiaries, surely all governments in all states are doing something absolutely wrong and brazenly so.
Yeah, you see, what you said is right, but the way to fix it really is to increase the incomes of the farmers, the small farmers particularly, And the way to increase their incomes is, firstly, you have to be able to finance farming. Today, most of the small farmers have to rely on money from the local money lender, despite 74 years of our independence. So now, unless we can fix that, and the rates of at which they borrow money from the money lenders is huge. Now, unless we can fix that, the farmer will continue to be indebted locally. And if he is indebted locally, as it is, he has very, very small holdings, holdings of less than a hectare. That's the average. So the farmer is not, his enterprise is not viable economically. So you have to, one of the ways of doing it is, firstly, you create jobs in the non-farming sector, or within farming sector, go in for horticulture, go in for other types of occupation within the broad agricultural sector. It could be dairying, it could be, fisheries and so on. But pure farming, and by farming, I'm referring to growing crops, your cereals particularly, rice, wheat, and the other millets, etc. This is not viable as an enterprise for a family whose holdings are less than a hectare.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jha. Ms. Menon, I come back to you. I return to you. You again, to reiterate, you are not a typical farmer. You came with the intent of becoming a farmer. You came with a lot of knowledge behind you, access. You had funding, most probably you did have funding and at least access to the markets. Now, put yourself aside for a moment and look at the poor farmer or the small and marginal farmer that Mr. Jha has been talking about. Keep him in mind. Do you see him facing a different kind of constraints? And if so, what should India be doing to help him, to handhold him towards prosperity?
In the region that I'm farming, Gautam, there is has been over the last 10 years, I've seen a deep appreciation of what is city demand. I mean, let me just place that, into our conversation from a farmer's perspective. Not just me, but all my local farmers, who have for years and years and years been growing millets in the monsoon season, perhaps doing one vegetable crop, in the non-monsoon season, and continuing thereafter. But with drip irrigation available, subsidies available for that, etc., and in a state that has enabled that to actually reach the farmers, we've seen that having applied all of that, they've slowly started to appreciate the fact that a big city like Bangalore sits close by, a little maybe 210 kilometers away is Chennai. The appreciation that there is demand over there is now very clear to most farming families, and the reason for that is that in most farming families, at least one or two members of the farming family have left the home in the farm, in the village, and gone to these cities to take up jobs. And they are seeing the demand over there. That comes back in again. Now, to Mr. Jha's point, I think there is the economics of agriculture is still very much linked into the local village, simply because that's really where they are taking the money from. And there is money lending that still holds them there, which definitely needs to be opened up, to be unpacked, and some clear solutions there need to be found. But with a lot of market access coming in, these last 2 years of COVID have also demonstrated that if you had enterprise and if you could use WhatsApp, you can actually sell. And a lot of younger generation has come back. I personally feel that in these last 2 years, we have seen a tremendous influx of new energy into farming in rural pockets, where younger generation people have had to come back home from cities, from the jobs that they were doing, and are willing to apply themselves and give some ideas. And so this is a good energy that we can actually build on top of. But if you were to look at it at a macro level, if you go into states like Bihar and UP and Madhya Pradesh, maybe the perspective is very different. But in South India, for sure, I know in Tamil Nadu, which is very, very linked to a entrepreneurial output of overall production, this is definitely a great time when we can leverage both new people coming into farming as well as an opportunity to to really link to markets, and MSP really doesn't play a part in this part of the country. It's not something that people are selling, to produce into MSP for. Largely, it is linked to markets, and therefore we've seen a lot of upsurge.
Thank you, Ms. Menon. In fact, you mentioned a very, very important point, which is the state-wise breakup of agriculture, and that is why agriculture is a state subject and not a union subject, despite the fact that for all doles, the all agriculture sector goes back to the union government. I want to ask Mr. Akshay Mathur. Mr. Mathur, you heard Mr. Jha, you heard Ms. Menon. You know what I've been observing, and you must have too, that over the past 3 to 5 years, there has been a growth of a sector called Agritech. Now, can Agritech help farmers, handhold them towards markets, in terms of selling, and towards finance in terms of demand, maybe sophisticated insurance products, maybe commodities, futures, etc. Can Agritech be seen to be the future of small and marginal farmers who are today under the burden of the local money lender, as Mr. Jha said, or doesn't have access to markets, as we all know? Could Agritech be the future?
Right. So your question emanates from Jha sir's opening remarks that most of the land holdings in India are small and therefore they're fragmented. And they continue to get more and more fragmented because population increases, and that piece of land further starts getting subdivided into generations that keep coming. As a result of which, there is no collectivism of the farmers, and therefore they're not able to collectively say that this is the amount of money that we're going to demand, which is conceptually why you have your agricultural markets. Now, can we apply technology to agricultural markets? Now, see, there is a good and a bad side to this. Your traditional physical agricultural markets, which are APMCs, regulated by the state, the farmer comes, gives the produce, gets the price. The entire process is done within 2 to 3 hours, and the commission agent may deliver the money to the farmer a little later, but that's okay. Now, the entire thing gets shifted online, where there are auctions. Now, here's the thing. Just because the buyers of agricultural product can't see each other, that does not mean that they can't collude with each other. So the buyers of agricultural produce could also then say that we are not going to pay you more than this. So that kind of an issue, which was there in your physical agricultural markets, to an extent would also be there in your non-physical or your e-agricultural markets. So the solution to
here,
that,
Mr. Mathur, you see, this problem, shouldn't we face the problem when it arrives rather than preempt? Because, of course, we should have preemptive design, policy design. We should incorporate the CCI, like you mentioned earlier, into the policy design. No problem. I'm just asking that these intermediaries, the Agritech people, are looking to cut all the surpluses out and reduce the number of middlemen in the chain. Now, clearly, the farmer will get a better price, so will the consumer, and so will the Agritech company, which is looking for greater valuations or income or whatever. Shouldn't we address the collusion argument after fixing this small chunk of agriculture, let us say market failure first?
Right. So when we're looking at the integration of agricultural tech, I'm sorry, you wanted to say something.
No, go ahead. I'll
Sorry. So if you want to look at the integration of agricultural tech, you're talking about providing better financial products or insurance products, right? You're saying we'll possibly provide a better marketing or a distribution platform. Fundamentally, you would also have to provide people with the information in the vernacular medium so that farmers are able to actually process that information. Technology, unless becoming more regional in nature, more accessible in nature in terms of the language that people understand, which is technology's greatest barrier in the first place. So agricultural technology has to be vernacular agricultural technology, which then reaches the farmer, for the farmer to actually access technology products that agricultural technology players are wanting to provide. Now, understanding the mentality of the farmers is also very important. When they're already overburdened with private money lender debt, and an agricultural tech player comes and says, you know what, we're going to give you a fantastic crop insurance scheme. The farmer is moving from private player A to private player B, which is where you'll have to provide a lot more convincing to the farmers that this private player B, which seems to be more fair, is still going to be more transparent, which is also why the government will also need to strengthen their crop insurance schemes. There are also Kisan credit cards, which give you a limited amount of agricultural debt. That could be integrated. When we talk about the whole larger, the JAM trinity, the Jandan Aadhaar mobile trinity, that is the fundamental basis of agricultural technology to come in. But to answer your question, can agricultural technology solve this? Not without vernacular mediums and not without a fundamental degree of digital literacy. And that's when farmers will be able to use this. A small section are, but a lot more. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mathur. Thank you. I'm told we have very little time, so I'm going to ask for closing remarks, Mr. Jha. What can we expect, or what would you like to see, 1 or 2 points only, in budget 2022?
See, what I would like to see and what is likely to come are two different situations, because this is election year in 5 states and one of the largest states in the country. And considering that there was a long drawn agitation by farmers, at least in North India, so what we can expect will be little more pandering to the farmers. But I don't think that whatever is done will have a long-term impact. Because for a long-term impact, we need to have a long-term plan as to how to increase the incomes of farmers and then go and assiduously follow that plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jha. Last word to you, Ms. Menon. How do you see, what would you like to see in budget 2022 for the marginal farmer? You are obviously self-sufficient.
Well, yeah, I consider myself a small farmer because that's really the land holding, but that we are working on. But yes, I think to Mr. Jha's point, we have lost a lot of momentum by the repeal of the farm laws, which I thought was a very good movement forward, great steps to do those amendments. But politics is what it is, and they have had to be stepped back. But I'm hoping that the momentum that has been gained in the areas where that pilot has already been started, the delinking of the APMC, especially with certain commodities, and where farmers have tasted the opportunity to get a better rate from our buyers, also to get connected to, say, e-commerce and those kinds of agritech that has become accessible to them, access to collection centers. I'm really hoping that momentum is kept on, and that there will be some courageous states and chief ministers who will be willing to take up these laws at the state end and push them forward. Because without fundamental change in our agri laws, we are going to just continue to keep pandering to the politics of this industry, where it really needs to move to the next level now. And I'm really hoping we can. Thank you,
Ms. Menon. So from politics, as Mr. Jha says that this is going to be a political budget, to market requirements, as Ms. Menon says, to vernacular. That was an interesting new idea that has come into the agritech sector by Mr. Mathur. Thank you very much for being here.